All right, so today we're going deep into a story that I think really gets to the heart of some simmering tensions that are happening in Israel. We've got audio recordings from a pretty pivotal day.
Oh, wow.
The day that Sheffi Paz, a 72-year-old woman, begins a 45-day prison sentence.
Okay. And I've heard of this case.
Yeah. Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see what you found out about this.
What's so compelling about this case is that it goes way beyond like your typical vandalism charge.
Right.
You know, Sheffi's actions and then all the reactions to it, it just opens up this Pandora's box of anxieties around immigration, law enforcement, and what a lot of people perceive as a double standard within the legal system.
Yeah. So it's not just about graffiti then?
Right. I mean, on the surface, you see graffiti and you think, okay, minor offense.
Right.
But then when you hear the residents of Sheffi's neighborhood talking about what they're experiencing, it's a very different picture that emerges.
Gotcha.
So let's actually start with Sheffi. What exactly led to her arrest?
So Sheffi was spraying these graffiti messages, protesting the Israeli legal system and the influx of foreign workers into her neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And she's remarkably unapologetic about her actions.
And she even injects some humor into it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's this moment in the recording where someone makes this lighthearted comment about her needing tough prison attire.
Right.
And Sheffi kind of plays along with it.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and you can tell she's not backing down. She refuses to apologize for what she did. In fact, she frames her imprisonment as a sort of victory.
It's almost like she's saying, imprison me, it only proves my point.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I think it speaks to this really deep sense of frustration that she has. It's like she's saying that her voice has been ignored for so long that even being incarcerated is a way to finally be heard.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's drawing attention to this really bad situation in Hatikva Quarter.
Which is her neighborhood.
Yes, her neighborhood. And residents describe it as being increasingly lawless and unsafe.
And the recordings really paint kind of a stark picture of daily life there, don't they?
They do, and it's a picture that contrasts sharply with Sheffi's crime.
Right.
So you hear residents describe a community that's just overwhelmed by an influx of foreign workers.
Right.
And that leads to a sense of fear and feeling abandoned.
Wow.
And there are these accounts of violence, theft, intimidation.
It sounds very scary.
Yeah, and just this palpable anger at what they see as a lack of action from authorities.
It's interesting because it almost feels like there are two systems of justice at play here, right?
Yeah.
You have Sheffi, who's getting a 45-day sentence for graffiti. While these residents are describing much more serious offenses that are seemingly going unpunished.
That's exactly the point that many residents are making, this idea of a double standard in law enforcement. Right. And it's a major source of their frustration because they see Sheffi being punished while they feel like their concerns and their safety are being ignored.
Wow.
And one resident even compares Sheffi to Natan Zada.
Who's that?
The assassin of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
Wow.
Obviously, a very highly charged comparison to make.
Yeah, that's a heavy comparison to make.
Yeah.
What do you think that reveals about the sentiment in the neighborhood?
I think it really underscores the depth of anger and frustration that people are feeling.
Wow.
These residents see Sheffi, as extreme as her actions might seem, as someone who's finally taking a stand against a system they believe has failed them. And that comparison to Zada, while shocking, speaks to the desperation that some feel.
So in a way, Sheffi becomes a symbol of this perceived injustice.
Precisely.
Right.
And that's where the chants of "we are all Sheffi Paz" come in.
Wow.
It's not just about her individual act, it's about this shared sense of grievance and feeling like the system is rigged against them.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
We should also note, though, that the journalists in the recording, while they seem to be sympathetic to Sheffi and the residents, they maintain a journalistic distance.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Because their presence and documentation of the events act as a form of accountability.
Right.
They're bringing attention to a situation that many feel is being ignored by mainstream media.
Yeah.
They're offering a more nuanced perspective than you might get from a quick headline.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that not everyone in the neighborhood supports Sheffi or her methods.
That's right. The recordings do capture some conflicting viewpoints.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some residents, particularly those who have moved to the neighborhood more recently, they're less sympathetic to Sheffi's actions. And they express concerns about what they see as increasing hostility.
So it's never really a simple black and white situation.
Never.
And this is where I think it gets interesting. We have Sheffi, the 72-year-old woman, at the center of this storm.
It's almost as if her actions, her imprisonment, have brought all of these simmering tensions to the surface.
Right. Her case is about so much more than graffiti. It's about anxieties over immigration, changing demographics, and the feeling of being unheard by those in power.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the story doesn't end with Sheffi going to prison.
Right.
In some ways, that's just the beginning.
Exactly. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to look at all the reactions to Sheffi's imprisonment and what it says about the power and limits of protest in a democracy.
I'm excited to dive into that.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're covering this.
All right, so we'll be back in a little bit with part 2 of our deep dive into the story of Sheffi Paz.
Great. You know, it's remarkable how Sheffi's imprisonment actually, in a way, seems to amplify her message.
Right.
She's become this kind of martyr in the eyes of some and transformed from this individual protesting into this symbol of resistance.
It's almost like a real-life example of the Streisand effect, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
The authorities try to silence her, but it only brings more attention to her cause.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, though, what are the legal precedents like in Israel for this kind of thing?
So that's a great question. The legal framework around protests and freedom of expression in Israel is really complex.
Okay.
There's this constant balancing act between allowing dissent and maintaining public order. And so in Sheffi's case, the charges probably fall under vandalism or property damage, but her supporters argue that her actions were a form of political protest, which would be protected under freedom of speech.
Right. And the recordings also kind of hint at the role of social media in amplifying her message.
Yes.
Her supporters are using platforms like Twitter and Facebook to rally behind her.
Right.
So it's interesting how this case is playing out both on the streets and online.
Absolutely. Social media has become this crucial tool for protest movements globally.
Yeah.
And Israel's no exception. You know, it allows for the rapid mobilization, the spread of information, and the formation of these online communities around these shared grievances. And so in Sheffi's case, social media has helped her story reach a much wider audience.
But of course, social media also has its downsides.
Of course.
It can be a breeding ground for misinformation.
Yeah.
And can contribute to polarization.
That's an important point. While social media can be a powerful tool for raising awareness and organizing, it's also essential to be discerning about the information that we consume and share.
Right.
It's more important now than ever to rely on credible sources and to engage in critical thinking.
Right. It's fascinating, though, to hear how Sheffi's story is resonating with people from such varied backgrounds.
Yeah.
There's actually a moment in the recordings where we hear from a woman from Ramat Hashron.
Oh, wow.
Which is a relatively affluent city north of Tel Aviv.
Right.
And she traveled to be there to support Sheffi.
Yeah.
And she says that Sheffi is fighting for all of us.
That's powerful.
It is. It's very powerful. And I think that really speaks to the broader anxieties that are kind of underlying this whole case.
Yes.
It's not just about Sheffi or the Hatikva quarter.
Right.
It's about this sense of unease, I think, that transcends socioeconomic lines. A lot of Israelis, regardless of their background, are grappling with these questions about national identity and belonging in the face of rapid societal change.
And it seems like the influx of foreign workers has become this kind of focal point for these anxieties.
Right, and the recordings don't shy away from the really complex emotions that surround this whole issue.
It is a very multifaceted issue. Israel has relied on foreign workers for decades,
Right.
particularly in agriculture, construction, and caregiving.
Right.
However, the rapid increase in the foreign worker population, coupled with this lack of clear government policy and integration efforts, has really fueled social and economic tensions.
Yeah.
And particularly in neighborhoods like Hatikva Quarter.
And you can hear that in the recordings.
Yeah.
This feeling of being overwhelmed and unheard.
Yeah, they express feeling abandoned by the authorities.
Right.
Which adds another layer to this whole issue of perceived double standards.
Absolutely. This sense of disconnect between the residents of Hatikva Quarter and the government is so palpable in the recordings.
It is. They feel ignored.
Yeah.
Their concerns about safety and changing demographics just completely dismissed.
And it's that sentiment, I think, that makes someone like Sheffi, who's willing to take a stand, even if it means going to prison, so appealing.
Right.
She becomes a folk hero I think, for those who feel like they have no voice.
She really does, and it underscores the power of an individual to ignite a movement.
Right.
Sheffi's actions, while seen as extreme by some, have forced a conversation about these issues that otherwise might have been swept under the rug.
And it highlights this enduring relevance of protest in a democratic society.
Exactly. It's about holding power accountable, demanding justice, and pushing for change.
Yep.
Sheffi's story is this reminder that even in a democracy, constant vigilance and active citizenship are just so crucial.
And it's interesting how, despite all the anger and frustration that we hear,
Yeah.
there's also this sense of hope
Yeah.
and defiance in the recordings.
Absolutely. People are coming together, voicing their concerns, and demanding to be heard.
It's really powerful.
It is powerful.
Yeah.
What makes Sheffi's case so compelling is that it's not just a story about one woman and her act of protest.
Right.
It's a microcosm of the challenges and contradictions of Israeli society.
Yeah.
This struggle for identity, the anxieties of change, and the enduring search for justice.
Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to ask you something. From your perspective, what stands out about this audio, about Sheffi's story, that you think is particularly relevant to our listeners today?
What resonates with me most, I think, is how Sheffi's story kind of reveals the limitations of even the most robust democratic systems.
Right.
Yeah, it's a reminder that justice can be slow, imperfect, and sometimes seemingly blind to the lived experiences of certain communities.
And in those instances, when people feel like their voices aren't being heard through traditional channels, it's not surprising that they might resort to more drastic measures.
Exactly. Sheffi's graffiti, while illegal, it becomes this form of amplified speech,
Yeah.
a way of forcing the issue into the public consciousness. It really raises these uncomfortable questions about when protest crosses the line from dissent into something more disruptive, even criminal.
We also can't ignore the role of the media in shaping how the story is perceived.
Right.
The journalists we hear in the recordings are clearly trying to present a balanced view, but their sympathies are evident.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how even the most well-intentioned reporting can be influenced by perspective.
It's a critical point. The media plays a really powerful role in framing narratives. Yeah. And understanding those underlying biases, both conscious and unconscious, is just crucial for anyone consuming news.
Especially around complex social and political issues.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's also interesting, I think, to consider how different audiences might interpret this story.
Yeah.
Some will see Sheffi as a hero, standing up for what she believes in,
Right.
while others might view her actions as destructive and counterproductive.
Yeah, that's the mark of a truly thought-provoking story, I think. It challenges us to confront our own biases, to examine our beliefs about justice and the limits of acceptable dissent.
Right.
It's not about these easy answers. It's about engaging in those difficult conversations.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Sheffi Paz's story,
Yeah.
I am left wondering what happens next.
Right.
Will her imprisonment spark more protests, or could it lead to a more constructive dialogue about the issues she's raised?
That remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure. Sheffi Paz, at 72 years old, has become this catalyst for a much-needed conversation in Israel. Yeah. Her case has exposed the fault lines within society, the anxieties around immigration, and the struggle to balance individual rights with the needs of the collective.
And for our listeners, I think Sheffi's story offers a powerful reminder that change rarely comes easily.
It doesn't.
It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to engage in those tough conversations, even when they make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
And we hope you'll continue to explore these issues and form your own conclusions.